You mentioned earlier, a lot of young people coming to the church.
Mhm.
I think one logical question for many people who have come to the church is like, okay, what now? Now that I've become Orthodox. So, what would be your advice to newly illumined Orthodox Christians?
Well, I'll say, first of all, that I have to sort of give the cop out answer to this, which as an Orthodox priest talking on the internet, I pretty much have to give before I give any advice whatsoever, which is talk to your spiritual father about it. I can tell you generally, sort of the counsel of the church about things. But each person has their own life, their own circumstances, their own strengths and weaknesses, and really only your spiritual father, only your father confessor is going to be able to give you, the best advice about how to apply these sort of timeless principles of the Christian life to our own specific lives. So, with that said, at the beginning, I would say, the first thing to do is just live the normal Christian life. Don't be too focused on immediately trying to find, what your own ultimate vocation might be. We all, no matter what it is that God ultimately wants us to do for the church, whether that's, to be a father, a wife, a priest, a monk, a teacher, whatever it might be, the foundation for anything, any of our labors, any of our efforts, if it's going to bear any fruit whatsoever, the foundation of it has to be prayer. It has to be, a real serious life of prayer. And so I think laying that foundation, first of all, before trying to jump in and do something, if, I forget, what the saying is, but basically, you can't give away what you don't have. So if we don't have a genuine spiritual life ourselves, our ability to help anyone else is likewise going to be extremely limited because it's ultimately going to just come from ourselves rather than from the grace of God. Our job as Christians is really to get out of the way of the Holy Spirit so that it can be, like St. Paul says, not no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. But that takes work. That's what ascetic effort is all about. That's what the life of prayer is all about, is trying to develop that inner union, that inner life of prayer that will allow the grace of God to come and not only bless but fill all of the efforts that we make beyond that. So, I would say go to as many of the church services as you're able to. Talk to your spiritual father about what the right prayer role is, and be faithful to that every single day. I think it can be tempting, especially for new converts, to feel like, quantity is the most important thing, that I should be praying a lot. I should have these long prayer rules and say all these long prayers. And that's what, sort of a spiritual life looks like. But almost inevitably that will lead to people just burning out. And then, you pray for 3 hours one day and then you don't even open the prayer book for a week after that because, or you get so discouraged that you can't sustain, that kind of intense spiritual effort that you just give it up, So, personally, my advice and my experience has been having a reasonable spiritual discipline that you do faithfully every single day will lead to much, much more progress than just trying to bite off some huge prayer rule because you read, in the sayings of the Desert Fathers that so and so did, 250 prayer ropes every single day, and that's how you become a saint or something like that. One of the metaphors that, in fact, the Desert Fathers used is, that our heart is really like a stone, and if you have a big, stony heart and you just pour a few huge buckets of water on it, the stone's really not going to be changed at all. It's still going to be the same way that it was before. But if you drip a little bit of water on that rock every single day, over time, it's going to be worn down. That stone will be broken up, and that living, true heart will be able to emerge. So, I would say, quality and consistency of prayer and of spiritual effort is much more important than quantity. But again, talk to your spiritual father about this. The other thing that I would say is, again, using the, sort of the analogy of the monastic life, because again, it's not like the monastic life is a different kind of Christianity or a different kind of spiritual life. It's the same kind of spiritual life. So just as here at the monastery, we have our private prayers that we do in our cells, we have the corporate prayers that we do together in church, and then we have our work. I also think it's important that we should find ways to work for the church, And again, this isn't to jump into some, huge career, or high, spiritual vocation. It's simply, going to your priest and saying, hey, I have a few hours on Sunday. Is there something that I can do around the church to lend a hand? Or is there's something that I can do? Can I help set up coffee hour? Whatever it is, find some small, humble way to contribute to what your church actually needs, because, it's very easy for us to sort of have these, lofty romantic ideas if I can do this for the church or that for the church. And it somehow becomes more about an image that we have of ourselves than it becomes about actually trying to meet the needs that exist right in front of us in the real world. And of course, that's not limited to the church, in its sort of visible capacity as an institution. It's also about helping the brothers and sisters that we see around us in the parish, or that we see around us at work, that we see around us in our neighbors. I think the process of trying to learn to see Christ in the people that God arranges for us to meet every single day is extremely important. And so I would say, and again, I'm not trying to give people rules, talk to your spiritual father about this, but one thing that I've found to be a very beneficial practice is, each day try to do at least one thing for somebody else for no other reason than that they need it, and that can be, it doesn't have to be, giving your money to somebody on the street, or, or even performing some task for someone who needs help with something. It can be saying a kind word to somebody who looks like they're having a hard time, or saying a prayer for somebody who, it seems like there's nobody to pray for them. I don't want to, it can be easy to spiritualize it too much as sort of a substitute for real action. So you have to find a balance. And again, this is where a spiritual father will be able to help us to do that. But finding some way to serve humbly the real practical needs of the people that God has put into our lives, I think that is very important as well. So those are a few sort of the basic pieces of advice that I would give. Every church is different. Every spiritual father is different. Every person is different. But I do remember that when I first converted, that the advice that my priest gave me, the advice that, and I think this came from the diocese, if I remember right, but basically for the first 3 years, don't try to pursue any formal vocation in the church, whether that's vocation, monasticism, whatever. For the first 3 years, just live as an Orthodox Christian. That'll give you a foundation. It'll also give you an opportunity, I think, to actually hear the calling of God, not just in the sense of what I gravitate towards, or what appeals to me when I think about it abstractly, but to see in our day-to-day lives, what doors is God opening? What doors is he not opening? It can be very tempting, I think, especially for us, young Americans to, try to make all these decisions in the abstract. I remember when I was going through the process of trying to decide whether to enter the monastery or not. At the time I was living in Wilmington, and at the parish there was another young man who was in a similar situation to me. He was telling me he had gone around and talked to different abbots and different people to ask for their advice on how to know, what does God want me to do in my life? And in this particular case, the question was to get married or to become a monk. And he said, finally, one abbot told him, look, you don't decide to become a monk in the abstract any more than you decide to get married in the abstract. You decide to marry a person. Same thing, you decide to enter a specific monastery. So you don't just, sit in your room one day and then all of a sudden say, okay, well, I'm going to go become a monk. That's not how it works. You have to have a relationship with the monastery. You have to, petition to a specific abbot to enter a specific community. And of course, you do that, almost all the time after you've gotten to know that community over an extended period of time. So, I do think that it's good if you feel like maybe you have a monastic calling to visit a monastery early on, but that's because I think it's a good idea for everybody to visit a monastery early on. It's going to be a beneficial experience for us no matter what God is ultimately calling us to. So if you do, I would say don't make it about a vocation. Just make it about, I'm going to go spend a few days in a spiritual place praying for a few days. Don't, like Chris said, let tomorrow take thought for the things of itself. Just do what I need to do for my spiritual life today. And again, organically, I think in many cases, that will lead to God's will being made more manifest. If you find after a few years that you're really living for that few days at the monastery, and you can't wait to get there again after you leave, well, that's a pretty good indication that maybe you do have a calling to the monastic life, you know. But just sitting in your room and thinking about, well, should I become a monk or not? Like, that's not really going to help you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good advice, especially for a lot of people who are just starting out. Like, just go to church, just do the everyday life for a little bit, and then later we can talk about vocation. I think that's good, sober advice.